Welcome everyone to our weekly virtual coffee hour with your Brattleboro state representatives and with wonderful guest appearance from Senator Ballot today. We're going to start with some updates from members of the delegation, and then we will move into questions and conversations. Really looking forward to this and have lots of information to share and curious to hear more about other people's experience. And Senator Ballot, do you want to kick us off with an update?
Sure. Good morning, all. I think the thing that has most been on my constituents' minds has been the trouble with the unemployment insurance system at Department of Labor. And this has been an ongoing, challenging situation for the last 3 to 4 weeks, with folks not being able to get through to Department of Labor, or if they do get through and they file an initial claim and they feel like they're being processed, they get kicked out a message from Department of Labor saying their social security number can't be found or some other error in the system. And so we had been going to the governor's team for the last few weeks, telling him that despite all of the work at Department of Labor and through no fault of theirs, they do not have the capacity that they need to serve the unprecedented volume. Department of Labor usually serves between 500 and 600 people a week filing for claims. They've had to deal with over 70,000 claims in the last few weeks. And so it is not unlike other states. Other states' systems have crashed as well. But we have been beating the drum for weeks now, saying not only do you need more capacity in people answering the phones, but you need to change the messaging that you're doing, that people are getting through email and on the website. I met along with my Economic Development Committee again with Commissioner Harrington last night, and Cameron Wood from Department of Labor. They stayed with us for over an hour answering our questions. So over the next 3 or 4 days, they're going to be bringing on dozens of more workers at Department of Labor, and the governor has charged DOL with clearing the backlog by this evening. And for those who do not get through the system by tonight, the governor has charged the treasurer with issuing a check for $1,200 to those people who are still waiting in the queue, because he understands that there have been many, many Vermonters who've been waiting for weeks to get any kind of unemployment insurance check from the state. So the other important piece is that the system for those who are self-employed will be going live on Tuesday. We have been meeting with the commissioner to ask him, do you really feel like you're ready to go live on this whole other system when we have thousands backlogged on the other system? And he reiterated to us that these are separate systems, one should not impact the other, and that the bulk of the work for those who are self-employed will be done online, will not require a phone call, and it's much more user-friendly. So despite the fact that there's going to be another group of tens of thousands of Vermonters filing for the federal self-employment piece, he does have confidence that they'll be able to get through on Tuesday. So I don't want to be a wise guy and say I believe it when I see it, but they're working as hard as they can, and they have been incredibly responsive, and yet thousands of Vermonters still haven't been able to get through. Both those things are true. So I know I heard from a lot of constituents in the last 24 hours that it has gotten better. More people have gotten through than in the last few weeks, but there's still a backlog. So I will look at my notes from yesterday while we take questions. I don't know what the format is. If you want to hear from each of you and then take questions, how do you usually do this?
We usually do updates and then do questions afterwards, because otherwise the conversation becomes a bit too dynamic to ever finish updates.
Yep. So I'll leave it there, and I'll go back and look at my notes from my meeting with Commissioner Harrington last night and see what else I might have missed.
Great. Thanks. Molly, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Well, Becca's covered the unemployment issue. I've had lots of constituents, same issues. So the one person who had made 700 calls finally things are moving ahead. So that's really good news. I think I see Michael Bosworth is on the phone, and he had asked last week about TCI and what's happening with that, the Transportation Climate Initiative. And I was on a meeting with the Sierra Club and a couple of members from Transportation Committee and Peter Walk, and basically we had a really good discussion. Peter saying, obviously nobody has the bandwidth right now to do that, but then there's been no official announcement about delaying it. So, we talked about the benefits. There was a person on at Sierra Club from Washington, and how this could really benefit the economy going forward, particularly with gas prices so low. But I think that the governor of New York, as great as he's been with his announcements regarding this crisis, has not been super cooperative in the discussion. So it's sort of a wait and see, but the issue is still alive, and there are a lot of people who are pressing forward on it, and it could be, certainly going forward in the state much economically beneficial. So that's just a little update, not too much of substance. And then in our committee, we had a discussion about the public transit money. The CARES Act is giving $20 million to the state for public transit, and the agency is figuring out how to there's been a 55% decline in ridership overall in the state in public transit, certainly, naturally. And then they're also having to spend a lot more money cleaning the buses and providing for social distancing for the people who still need to ride the bus. So there was discussion, the agency is figuring out ways to use the CARES money to replace Chief Fund money. And the way that they've figured it out right now, it would return $4 million to the transportation fund for this year, which is great because we're in a big shortfall like everybody else. And then they're thinking about, how do we move forward with public transit? How do we move forward in the sort of, near future with social distancing? There are some things for demand response pilots that might be a better fit for this sort of post-COVID scenario. So that's sort of one other thing. We are saving $450,000 a month by not running Amtrak. So that's money that can be used in the future. And I'll just talk about one more thing, because I don't want to take up too much time, is I was on a call with Migrant Justice, and there's so many implications to this crisis that they just keep revealing themselves. They're the obvious things about unemployment, but the migrant workers who are keeping our dairy industry alive are working in very close contact with each other. Their living conditions are not great, and the health clinics that they've been going to, clinics for the uninsured, are struggling, and actually one of them is closed down in Addison County. So there's just another issue, and I think that it's going to be, I think the Senate Ag Committee might be taking up this issue, because there are a few people on that committee, and Becca might have more information about that, who are interested in trying to figure out how can they can get free testing, but they can't get, can they get healthcare, et cetera. So that's just another sort of issue that's not necessarily prevalent in our community, but statewide. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Molly. Tristan, do you want to go next, or do you want me to jump in?
Oh, I can jump in, and then you can do cleanup of anything. I want to make sure. I think I'm adding things that Becca didn't say about UI. For one, there's. Did you mention the unemployment assistance hotline that's come up for the self-employed, independent contractors, sole proprietors?
No, and I know
okay.
that link's now up on DOL.
Yeah, so there is a number. I'm going to put it in the chat. And my understanding of the timetable is that people will be able to begin to register on Tuesday and then apply for benefits by Friday. I believe that in answer to Ellen's question, if you don't have a computer, I think you're probably going to have to use that assistance hotline in order to make, to do the reporting necessary to file. It doesn't, the guidance isn't explicit about that, and I may be wrong, but my guess is that that's the correct way. So that was one piece that I knew I wanted to flag. The other thing is, I did not make it to yesterday. We had a briefing in the afternoon that included Chris from the Banking Association, but I do know, and Emily, you can layer on top of this anything that I miss. I do know that he testified in the House Commerce Committee the day before, sort of anticipating what he was going to say, and three things that I thought were particularly interesting. One is that Vermont per capita was the third best in the country at securing funds from the PPP, from the Payroll Protection Program, and from the EIDL programs. That's good. The dollar amount that banks had done within that program that will be hitting in the next, between now and the end of April, basically, is $853 million that's already been approved, that's going to be hitting the Vermont economy from that program. As people probably know, that barring a change from Congress, both programs are out of money. And so he was recommending, even though there wasn't a system set up by the federal government or from the Small Business Administration federally to create a queue so that you could keep putting applications in, one second, just answering a question from Melissa, who's taking notes, he was recommending that his to the banking businesses, that they actually create their own internal queues so that they process paperwork and keep the process moving, even if there isn't a formal federal queue, so that when the presumption is it will be a when that program gets more funding in the next week or so, as they figure out the political stalemate, that those loans will be ready to go, and we can continue to draw that money into the state. So some people waited because of concerns about whether they could meet the 8-week window, concerns about pulling together the finances, and so he's definitely recommending that people who are looking at that program continue to put applications in, that there's no reason to not try to do that and work with the lenders. And so I think those are the big updates. And then anything that I didn't catch on either of those, that Emily, that you know of, please jump in.
Yeah, thank you. So you covered much of what Banking Association talked about in that broad briefing, that we have run out of money, we got a lot of money, and hopefully there is more money coming soon. And that people should have careful conversations with their bankers before they enter into any of these agreements, because a lot of the guidelines aren't entirely clear yet. So very good to apply and get yourself in the line, but the forgiveness guidelines are not clear to anyone. They're not clear to the banks, they might not be clear to the federal government, and they certainly can't be clear to anyone signing on the dotted line yet. So it's really important to get yourself in the line if you want to get in the line, but please be careful about if you could sort of live with the flip side of the agreement if your loan isn't forgiven. Also want to mention with regards to unemployment insurance that benefits are backdated, which is really important and very different from how unemployment insurance usually works. So people who have been around the bend before might not be trusting in that, but in this particular case, we are backdating unemployment benefits. And I think that's really important and wonderful. And I hope that's one of the things we can carry forward into the future.
And
so, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, not only are we backdating another thing that's happening, which will be new in the last 48 hours, is one real concern that people had was they would get on to their account through DOL and they wouldn't be able to go back and log in previous weeks. And so that has changed in the last 48 hours. That has been a huge gumming up the works that has been happening over the last few weeks. And so that you should be able to get on now and go back and apply for those previous weeks.
Thank you. And then again, would like to, I think I said this last week, but I'm saying it every chance I get. This is not how government should work. We should do better than this. I absolutely trust the Department of Labor is doing the very best they can right now to clean up what is really the legacy of like 20 years of underfunding a department. So the trust fund that the money comes out of is actually the best funded in the country. We are in the best place to be paying out these benefits and have the most ability to do so, which is really exciting. And that's something the legislature has been working on for a long time, since the recession. But we have been underfunding our computer systems because it's incredibly unsexy to spend state dollars on new computer systems. And this is in some ways a result of that. So I'm really going to be carrying this sort of lesson into the future for myself about infrastructure really does matter, both virtual infrastructure and physical infrastructure. One more thing that's exciting for me about the self-employed benefits situation is that the reason that it's going to be easy to do online is because they're going to be pulling data from the tax department to verify people's income, which is not something that happens for other state benefits programs. So if you're applying to any of the through the Agency of Human Services for food stamps or something, historically you have not been able to just have them verify your tax information. You've had to submit tax claims. I know it's particularly complicated for farmers. And so in this case, we're really creating a new system that verifies tax data internally. And I think that also is another really great model that perhaps we could carry forward for other benefits programs. I want to touch on essential workers. And so some threads of things that are happening in various committees and I'm paying attention to through the Workers Caucus. One is hearing from a lot of constituents who are both essential workers or are concerned about essential workers around workplace safety for essential workers. And just want to really encourage people to call VOSHA if you see a problem or if you're experiencing a problem around workplace safety. That is the agency that is charged with dealing with that. And they are investigating claims. Their first step is to send a letter saying like, hey, we heard a complaint that people aren't safe. Here is how you become safe. And that's a really great step for a lot of folks, for a lot of employers who just, might not know all the rules. And so that's the first step, is sort of assuming best intentions with that and then moving from there. And generally they keep the complainant's information private and move from there. And so that's one important option I think we have when we're concerned about worker safety at various businesses. The second thing is that we're looking at various proposals around hazard pay and how to take care of hazard pay. In some cases, this is happening on a business by business basis. We've had a lot of successful union negotiations, especially at our food co-ops, around raising wages for hazard pay. And there are some proposals in the Senate to move that forward in some way, which Senator Ballant could answer questions about, and I certainly can't. And then the last thing I want to mention is confusion around school budgets and taxes and what is a great big mess, and there's no nicer way to say that. There are some communities that have not yet passed their school budgets. We are one of them. All of Wyndham Southeast has not yet passed their school budget, and then just because we never had a chance to vote. And there are other schools, other school districts that voted down their budgets, and so they still need to vote again on their budget. And so we're looking at various proposals to help those schools find budgets, because it's really hard to do that in the short term because they're very connected to how communities send out their tax bills, which need to happen starting early July. And so various proposals we're looking at, none of which are in any way definite, include sort of default budgets, a default inflator, letting districts decide for themselves. We really want to be sure that we're getting as closer to voter intent as we possibly can, and being informed by the boards that know their schools best and their school budgets best. Similarly, there's some real challenges with the education fund, which receives a lot of its revenue through meals and rooms taxes and sales tax, of which we have very little right now because people are not spending money on much other than groceries and toilet paper. And so as we look at shortfalls in that, as we think about in the future, people struggling to perhaps pay their property taxes because people's incomes are lower, we're looking at where the town's responsibilities are in that, where the school district's responsibilities are in that, and where the state's responsibilities are in that as sort of the largest body to be able to carry that. And we can't make any decisions, again, until we truly understand what the federal government is doing with regards to the CARES Act, because it's a lot of money and it's still not clear to us where and how we are able to spend it. And so a lot of us are in a little bit of a holding pattern as we continue to figure out what flexibility that's going to allow us and what creativity and how much it's going to be able to backfill missing revenue, because we know that as we enter a recession, it's not very feasible to increase the tax burden on all of us. And with that, curious from legislators if I missed anything or if we should move to questions and answers. Senator Ballant.
Yeah.
Just want to reiterate what Emilie said, because I've heard quite a bit of concern from constituents about whether the trust fund for UI will run out of money. And we are in no way concerned about this. The trust fund is incredibly robust. Everyone will get their claims paid and all the back claims paid. So if that is a source of anxiety for people, if you've been in the queue and you haven't been able to file, unlike what's happened with the SBA program and the Paycheck Protection Program, we are in no danger of running out of money with UI.
Molly?
Yeah, I just want to say that regarding the unemployment, I had a question from a constituent about whether the extra $600 would count as, would they have to report that as extra income to Vermont Health Connect? And the answer is yes. It will work against your benefits, but unless you're on Medicaid. So I just wanted to report that I got that information from Ledge Council.
Thank you, Molly. Moving into questions.
There was a question about the financial stability of the healthcare system, hospitals, clinics. I do know there's federal dollars. Two things on I saw Becca about ready to say, but I'll tee us up. One is that this is one of the key places that the federal power battle is currently playing out, in that Senate and House Democrats at the federal level are looking for a significant package to benefit rural healthcare, and McConnell and the Republicans are not, and also that there are some funds already flowing through the system that are shifting in an attempt to prop up parts of the system. And then I will turn it over to the senator.
Yeah, just to add, there is no way to sugarcoat this. Our hospitals, pretty much every single hospital is taking a huge hit from this emergency. When you eliminate the possibility of doing any kind of elective surgery or any ongoing maintenance in people's health care, that is the margin that keeps hospitals open. And so from Grace Cottage to BMH to Springfield to Copley, they're all really, really struggling right now. And there's just no other way to say it. So we are absolutely dependent on these federal dollars to backfill and support these hospitals. We in Southern Vermont, we need our community hospitals to stay open. It is not really feasible or possible for us to start shifting all our healthcare over to Keene or up to Hanover we need to keep these hospitals open here. And so that is something that we're really, really concerned about on the Senate side. Our Health and Welfare Committee has been meeting just about every single day to try to figure out going forward how we are going to keep these hospitals solvent. So.
Ellen, did that cover it for you, or do you have more questions, or does anyone else have questions about health of the health system?
Yeah, that actually Molly addressed my question as well in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from folks? Feel free to raise your hand either inside the computer or with your actual hand, whichever works better for you. Yes, go for it. Dave.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having this. I started seeing information yesterday about the university closings planned for Northern Vermont. Can people speak on that? Is it too soon? It seems like it seems related to COVID, but it also seems related, you know, sort of to the trend of losing our small universities. And, you know, to me, isolated areas in Northern Vermont are going to be really hard hit by that.
Yes.
And, you know, we're trying to keep young people in the state, and that seems very counterproductive. So just curious if there's anyone who can give an update on what's going on with that, please. Thank you.
We might be able to give a couple of different updates from different lenses, and that might be useful. Becca, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. So we have been hearing for some years about the concerns of financially and also enrollment concerns in the state college system. So in that way, this announcement was not unanticipated, but we didn't know the scope of what the trustees and the chancellor were considering. When we first started to talk about this within the Senate a couple weeks ago, it was a further consolidation of Linden and Johnson and possibly closing one of those campuses. But what we heard yesterday was a complete and total overhaul and shutting Randolph Tech and then transferring students over to Castleton. And this was not anything that we anticipated. So I can't express to you enough how shocking it was for us to get that word through one of our senators on our morning call yesterday. And so it is a lot of the decision-making powers rest in the trustees. And I know Tristan can talk more about that as he sits on the Board of Trustees at UVM. However, there is statutory language that talks about what our charge is as legislators to make sure that decisions around what is happening with the state colleges do not adversely impact communities. I'm paraphrasing the language. I can pull it out for you, David, but I don't have it in front of me right now. So one of the things that we talked about yesterday in the Senate is how do we slow down this decision making? Because you were right, this is going to impact Linden. This is going to impact the Kingdom. This is going to impact Randolph. And we know that one of the ways in which we keep Vermonters here is when they go through those systems. The other strong concern that we have, Jeanette and I talked about it yesterday, Senator White, your other Windham County Senator, is that we get our nurses from these programs. We get our meteorologists from these programs. We get so many of the workers that stay in Vermont through these programs. And so there are a lot of questions that we're going to be asking of the chancellor and the trustees. We're trying to stay in our own lanes as legislators, but we're trying to really apply pressure to see that the investment of dollars in these universities have a greater impact outside of the schools in their communities. And we show our values through how we invest our money. And so I had a doctor when I was pregnant who said, you know, we always pay the piper, Becca. So you might have morning sickness now and your neighbor's gonna have a colicky child later. So we all pay the piper. And so we can either decide to invest in these universities now, or we're gonna pay in other ways later on. And so we wanna have a really honest discussion in the Senate about what that means to invest in your values. So I don't have any specific steps yet. We're still arguing within our caucus about whether we should come out with a strong statement, united as a Senate. We'll know more on Monday for sure. Tristan, you wanna jump in?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I'll just share that my perspective is a little different. It's informed both from having worked within higher ed at Marlborough College for the last 6 years or so. And obviously Marlborough is closing in just a couple of months. And so being on sort of the inside of that, but also I'm in my 5th or 6th year of being a trustee elected by the legislature to the University of Vermont Board of Trustees. And so there's a couple things I want to speak to the larger issue in a second. But before I forget, I want to pick up on a thread that was in the chat asking about whether CCV would be affected, and Emily said that it's not immediately connected to this. It may limit opportunities for folks to move on to a 4-year degree. I actually think it may open up more possibilities for over time, and I'll explain why I mean that. But not only is Greenfield Community College well connected to the Brattleboro branch, but actually people may not know that UVM and CCV have an incredible collaboration. That the largest transfer pool every year to UVM is CCV students transferring into UVM, and they graduate at like a 91% completion rate, which is 2 or 3 percentage points better than anybody else. And there are something like 29 different articulation agreements with UVM. And my sense, and this is speaking to my slightly different perspective, I'm not at all surprised at this announcement. I felt that there was a lot of political gamesmanship over the last few years of avoiding telling the legislature the truth of what was going on in the state college system. I don't know that it was intentional. Maybe it was, optimism or the best hope that things could somehow be different. But within higher ed circles, most of the people who know that I've talked to who know Vermont's higher ed really well have expected this kind of crisis to emerge. It was just a question of when, not if. And I say that not with any any enthusiasm for that being the case or being true somehow, that this is finally now revealed, because the pain in these communities is going to be very real, just as frankly for us here in Windham County, the loss of Marlborough is substantial. It's deeply personal for several of us on this call, and will have a huge long-term impact on our region, just as the vulnerability of other institutions in our area will as well. So all of that, I think, is incredibly difficult and an incredible challenge for what rural higher ed looks like in Vermont, where I want to give the state college system a little bit of a cover here, is that the demographic challenge that's hitting higher ed is hitting everybody. It's brutal. And everybody wants the full pay student from somewhere in the Northeast who wants to come and leave their hometown and go to Vermont, and or even go to Massachusetts from Connecticut or whatever. That there's been a substantial demographic shift in the Northeast. We are older. We have fewer graduating seniors. Vermont, of course, we know is one of the leaders in that, but we're not alone. It's been a New England-wide problem. 50% of college students still go to school within 100 miles of their home. And New England is also home to a larger percentage of academic institutions per capita than just about anywhere else in the country because of the historic origins of higher ed in the United States. So we're competing for a declining pool in a market that's still surprisingly local, and everybody is desperate for the students who can afford to pay. And what that leads to is very challenging enrollment patterns for many, many institutions. And COVID is probably going to accelerate more contraction that has been years coming outside of Vermont as well as inside of Vermont. And this is, the state college's vulnerability, is one facet of this. But we've lost Southern Vermont College, Green Mountain College, Marlborough, College of St. Joseph's. Did I say that already? Necky is vulnerable. Goddard is vulnerable. Like this is a macro trend, and like all macro trends, when it sort of comes up in our world when we weren't looking for it, it can be challenging. But I want to move on. But that this is going to be a complex story that continues to unfold.
The only thing that I would add, Tristan, and I agree with so much of what you said, I just want to highlight, though, all those colleges that you mentioned are private colleges. The difference is that our state college system is a much more affordable alternative to so many Vermonters, and that's my concern.
Yep. And Emily wanted to jump in. No, just I can speak to one thing, which is because I'm in the UVM system, people have been asking, why don't we have a single integrated system? That has been tried in many different states. And generally speaking, the governance challenge of having a fully integrated governance structure over the sort of the flagship research university land grant side and the state college side has not worked very well historically. And most places that have tried it have, that went into it as an experiment have ended up decoupling them in the long run. And it is a quirk of the way that we are, organized. The level of legislative influence on the board, 9 members of UVM's 23-member board are elected by the legislature, and I think 3 of 7 on state colleges, or is it more than that? Anyway, it's we are also very involved in the governance structure through legislative elections.
Other, I know Tony had a question. Does anyone want to add anything on the higher ed topic before we move on? Tony, take it away. You are muted though.
Hi. So I just want to clarify about the unemployment. Like I've been trying for 3 weeks, probably only 200 calls, not nearly 800. And I just got, I didn't try yesterday, but I got new information. The thing about like my situation is I am a wage earner at NECA. I also am, I'm a performer, so I, probably qualify for the, for the self-employed. And then I also get rental income that's been dramatically decreased. So I wanted to make sure what I've been thinking is I would just talk to unemployment about all those issues and see what they suggested. But I'm wondering who I should actually be contacting first, or do I have to contact the different elements of unemployment, or, I just want to make sure that all my information is properly assessed so that I'm going to get whatever is rightfully, whatever is rightfully due. I don't want to double dip, and I don't want to be undercompensated.
So your rental income would count as self-employment income.
Okay.
Your wages from NECA would really depend on exactly how many dollars they are. And I don't know if we want to get into that right here. But I think any of us would be happy to follow up with you privately to really get into the nuts and bolts of it.
Okay, well, I'm just wondering if I should just call this, can I call one of these unemployment numbers and just talk to them about all of these things, and they'll sort me out?
That would be so wonderful if you were able to do that successfully. That would be great.
Okay. Yeah, and hopefully if the logjam breaks this weekend, as the governor has said will happen, then getting your questions answered and getting fixed retroactively should all be possible.
Right. Yeah, I'm not concerned about that. So I'm, the thing I got from unemployment said that I should be able to put my claims in, and then every subsequent day I can claim for the next week, and then I would be compensated for that.
Yeah.
What I would add, though, is when you do call, there's a lot of temps working right now, and your issue is actually fairly complicated since you need to be accessing 2 separate systems. So I would ask to be transferred to someone who understands the system rather than is just processing benefits.
Okay, good, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, in general, some people who are self-employed who applied early and were rejected are, we spread the word basically that if you applied early or rejected, you should apply again. If you were
In the
doing
new
so
system.
in the new system, if you were self-employed and applied in the old system and were rejected. You know, this is a comment, and I don't mean, again, this isn't to beat up the Department of Labor, but just to acknowledge the challenge of how old this system is. I was trying to help a local business owner process what was going on with the Social Security number stuff, and I read the Department of Labor's website update this week on the Social Security number issue that people are experiencing. And the system is so old and really not set up for this, and it gives an error message, Social Security number not found. And what the guidance says, and I'm paraphrasing, it says it may be because you applied too early, it may be because you applied too late, it may be because you've already been paid, and it may be because you're not going to get paid.
It's like a Dr. Seuss story.
It literally everything and nothing.
Yes, yes. And in the challenge, you're absolutely right. That's pretty much exactly what it says, Tristan. And we talked to the commissioner yesterday and Cameron Wood at Department of Labor, and what they said is the real heroes of this crisis at DOL behind the scenes are all the people who understand COBOL programming still, because that's what we're dealing with here. And they're trying desperately to change the messages because it's so pathetic and so heartbreaking for people.
I just wanted to add, there's a link on the Department of Labor site. I don't know if you've registered already, where it asks you to put in your email. This is for people who are going to be applying for unemployment for self-employed people, and it will give you updates. So that was what the Labor Department recommended for people who are waiting for the self-employment application. So that might be, I can get that for you. I'll look it up in a minute.
Thanks, Molly. Tony.
So the thing is, I've been waiting to, like, it wouldn't let me do it online. It wouldn't let me file my claims. I'm in the system, but I've been waiting to talk to someone because I didn't want to do stuff online and have it not be, have different understandings from different processes. So does that make sense?
I think that's a really good plan.
Yeah, this is just an extra, like, insurance that your email is there. That's all.
Okay.
No, it's not going to, has nothing to do with like redoing your application.
Okay.
They just send you updates about when they're fixing different pieces. Yeah. I'm gonna move on to a question from Michael about Wyndham Northeast jumping the gun in anticipating large cuts in state funding. I have no idea what's happening in Wyndham Northeast, nor why they did what they did. Perhaps Senator Ballant does.
Simply put, I think they are jumping the gun. There is a lot of information we're still trying to get from the feds and from the treasurers and from the Joint Fiscal Office about how we might be able to backfill these budgets. I don't think we need to be looking at austerity budgets right now. That's how I feel about it. And I know they're making decisions based on what they're seeing on the ground, but every single district is facing this. And I don't think that this is the direction we want to go down, is drastically cutting all support services or extracurricular. So yes, I do think they're jumping the gun.
And not jumping the gun, meaning they're getting out ahead on, in the right direction, but jumping the gun, perhaps acting too early with not enough information.
Exactly. Thank you for the clarification. I've been known to mix my metaphors.
Oh, I just want to be clear that from everything I've been hearing in Ways and Means, which I think matches up to some of what you've been hearing in finance, we aren't discussing austerity measures.
Nope.
We really know that kids are going to be coming back to school with perhaps even more needs than they had last year, and that we're going to need to have schools that are ready for that.
Yes.
Hazard pay and clinic assistance for dairy workers. What's to say more about hazard pay than I already said, Bob? Some of it is unions really getting better organized about negotiating for that, and I'm sure you're following those conversations. And Senator Ballant, do you want to talk about the hazard pay bill that's floating through your committee?
It's actually not in my committee.
Oh, where is it?
There's a subcommittee that was formed of people in the Senate who straddle a bunch of different committees. So actually people that you could reach out to on the Senate side who are more involved in those conversations are Senator Chris Pearson and Senator Cheryl Hooker. Pearson sits on ag, Cheryl sits on economic development, and they've been working actually with the Appropriations Committee because they want to do a simple fix. They don't want to actually have to have it pass through DOL. They want to actually get money out the door quickly to these folks. So you can watch, Bob, a discussion that was, if you look on the Senate website for appropriations, they had a a live Zoom meeting that was streamed through YouTube yesterday about how far the discussions have gone. And I think that's your most up-to-date information that you can get about this.
Next up on questions is from Anna, and it's, has there been any discussion yet about schools reopening in the fall, or if the state is considering online learning, and that some universities are proactively moving their semesters? My understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected, is that some of the universities that are moving their semesters are doing it because it's not, it's really hard to get applications and acceptances figured out right now for the fall semester. And so that feels really, that's sort of where a lot of the risk is lying for folks. And that's very sort of closer quarters. I have not heard conversations about public schools not reopening in the fall beyond the kinds of sort of worried conversations that we're having right now. It seems like the governor is moving forward with some very slow reopening, and school reopening was somewhere on like level 3 of the chart that I saw.
So we've had just some preliminary conversations between finance and ed about what next year will look like. Most of those conversations have been around money issues, but what has been spoken by the senators who serve on education is that there is an awareness that there is an incredible concern about mental health issues for families and for kids if we don't figure out a way to, in some form, get kids back to school in the fall. So unless we're facing another extreme spike in cases this summer, I think that is what the governor has signaled that we're moving towards, but there's been no formal or informal conversation around this particular issue with legislators that I know of. Tristan, do you know?
No, I would agree with everything you said. I was just going to speak to the higher ed thing. A lot of this will a lot of it will depend on the availability of testing and the speed with which testing can be processed, because fundamentally, like, the ability to congregate in large numbers is going to be dependent on stamping out any second wave of the pandemic that arises. And if you think about schools in general, but at all levels, they are petri dishes, in the best of times. And so, that issue, for all that it seems like just a crazy tug of war at the federal level over who's responsible, that's actually the fundamental lever that has to be in place in order to change the outcomes. I saw somebody's hand, but I can't remember who it was who was waving. Oh, Tony, yeah.
I just wanted to go back to the hazard pay. Does that, like, I've been working with FoodWorks, and like Groundworks. Was that going to cover people who were in these nonprofit organizations who were, doing, pretty important, overwhelmed work right now? There are a lot of volunteers like me and other people who obviously aren't going to get hazard pay, but I'd like to make sure that the people in these nonprofits who are, really out there helping people would be covered.
I think that there's some definitional issues around folks who are essential. Like, there's an assumption that anyone who is still working is out in the world is an essential worker, because otherwise they wouldn't be allowed to work outside in the world. And then there's a little bit of sort of wiggle room around folks who are going to their office to sort of like, do the back end financials every, once a week, and making sure, I generally like to opt on the side of more people getting money than less people getting money, so that we're not leaving anyone out. But yes, folks who are at the front lines of social work are absolutely essential workers, just as much as healthcare folks and grocery store clerks and whoever else.
Unmute myself. So I had to hop off the appropriations call yesterday partway through because I had another call. But I know one thing they're really trying to address is any worker that is in food distribution, because they understand that without food distribution, the whole system comes crashing down if we don't have food for nourishment. And so we had gotten some pushback from folks in the field saying it isn't right for you to be supplementing the pay of workers when a private company or a private entity should be supplementing themselves. And we feel like that is not the time to have this discussion. Those folks need to have a pay bump, and if we can figure out a way to do it through government, then we're going to do it, and we can have the semantics discussion later on. But it is the people that need the money, and we can settle up scores later, as it were. So.
We are just coming up to 10. Wondering if anyone has any final thoughts they want to share before we wrap up. We are doing this weekly. At some point, depending on how long we go on like this, existing in the virtual realm, we might move to less often, but right now it seems that we still have many urgent issues that we want to cover regularly. So please spread the word that these are happening. I'm posting them just on Facebook and Front Porch Forum. But if anyone wants to share them more broadly, I would very much appreciate that, because I feel like I'm always missing spots and not sure where they are. And if anyone has any feedback to how to make these meetings more dynamic or thrilling through the airways, please reach out and share that. Much thanks to Millicent for taking notes each week. I am trying to do my best to edit them and then post them up on the events, but I am failing at that one, and we'll continue trying. And
I will be sending this.
Final word.
Yeah, and I'll just reminder that I will be sending this to BCTV, and so if this part of the conversation is part of the broadcast after editing, if they do any, then just a reminder to people watching on BCTV that this conversation that happens weekly is open to you as well, and you can find it on Facebook and Front Porch Forum. And also, if you do want to reach out to any of us for information on how you can access by phone or some other way if you're having trouble finding it, all of us have publicly listed emails, and some of us, if maybe all of us, have publicly listed phones that you can call to get through to us. And we do want wide participation from anyone who's able to get there. So you are all invited, and we hope that you're able to join.